Hi, my name is Noel Hidalgo, also known as Noel, also known as No-Neck. I'm a Gemini, and apparently Uranus is passing, Gemini is passing through, my moon is passing through my Gemini and going into my Uranus. So I just want to start off with a dirty joke. We do that here at BetaNYC. This is Jolly. He's going to be videotaping, and thank him. He's from the Internet Society. If any of you have meetups that you want recorded, Jolly is your man to go to. He has a whole rig and a whole setup. He can even live stream should the bandwidth be appropriate. For those of you who have been here for the first time, or this is your first time coming, please raise your hand. Woohoo! All right, we got some newbies in the audience. The best thing to know is that we use two hashtags kind of in this, or that symbol, the BetaNYC, or the Bike Hack Night as one word, even though it's two here. If you need to get on the Wi-Fi, there's signs that are posted all around. And generously thank the Rudin Center of Transportation, Policy, and Management for donating the food and the space this evening. So, welcome. If you didn't get the Wi-Fi, here's another location to get the Wi-Fi. And thank you, Rudin. So this is a great opportunity, if you haven't met your neighbor, to take 2 minutes and just to introduce yourself and find a new face, say hello, and find out what each other does.
I'm Jonah.
Hi, what's your name? Hey, nice to meet you.
Oh, it is 100%.
Yeah.
So for those of you that haven't been out to a BetaNYC night beforehand, I want to talk a little bit about who we are real briefly, just so that way everybody's on the same page. So BetaNYC is building a connected New York for the people, by the people, for the 21st century. We have 4 values that we've laid out through a series of dialogues, and they are the freedom to connect, the freedom to innovate, the freedom to learn, and the freedom to collaborate. We see these 4 freedoms as an extension of the 20th century 4 freedoms that FDR proposed, which is the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. And so we use these 4 freedoms, connect, innovate, learn, and collaborate, as an opportunity to explore municipal data and municipal opportunities. And we focus on community. We do that through hosting hack nights and beta talks. We do quite a bit of advocacy, which I can bring you up to speed on some of the stuff that we've done. And then we do this all through a safe space, and that's a really important term because we want a government for the people, by the people, for the 21st century, and that means that we want to be as inclusionary as possible, and so therefore we really frown on discrimination, and we really try to be as inclusionary as possible. So if you have any issues at all, please come talk to me, and I'll make sure that we address them immediately. One of the cool things that the city's going on right now, the city's putting on, is called reInvent 311. I happen to be one of the judges, and that's a competition to use the content API, the 311 content API, which we had a session, I believe, 2 weeks ago. If you are looking to incorporate municipal data into your applications and you're looking for a collection of facilities, municipal facilities, you should first look at the content API through 311. It's what 311 operators use when you want to call in a complaint. It also includes the bridges, on-ramps and the off-ramps, any location throughout the city that 311 is using to register a complaint. Excuse me. You're going to find it through the content API. You'll also find a series of curated questions that 311 operators ask that walk you through the daisy chain of finding out what the proper response is. So it's like, how do I register my kid for school? There'll be a few different questions. You'll actually see the questions in the content API. And the idea behind reInvent 311 is to let's situationalize the questions, the 301 questions, so that way if you have a media site or if you have a particular location that somebody is searching for, keyword like, let's say you're on Gothamist and you see cockroaches. Every time you search for all the awesome cockroach maps that we're building or that are being built here in New York City, right next to that, there's kind of a little iframe that says, you have a complaint about a cockroach? Go ahead, click here, and that'll be fed into the 3-in-1 infrastructure. So next month, which is a new year, we're going to try something a little bit different. It's been great that we've had these fun conversations and kind of explored a lot of government data. This has been kind of our opportunity to explore all the advocacy work that we've done over the last few years. But we actually want to start putting this data to better use. And we found a particular set of users that don't have tools that we really want to offer them. And believe it or not, it's our city council members and our community board members. They have some of the bless you. They don't have the tools that really go into the city's open data catalog. And so we're going to run a series of events that are going to be in complementary to scraping data that we get on PDFs or just taking the city's open data catalog and start to build dashboards and visualizations that work for community boards and that are more or less tailored to community boards and city council members. We're going to do this for 8 weeks, and then we're going to end up at a hackathon called Code Across New York City, which is also going to be during Social Media Week. So we've started to stack up a series of events. We don't have locations for all of them, but we do have where they are open and save the dates. So on January 8th, we're going to have a kind of an ideation night where we're going to talk about kind of this next 8-week sprint and try to form teams and imagine big apps, but really tailored toward one of the underserved customers of the city, which is city council members and community boards. I have a particular request from someone inside of city government which may help us out later on. If anybody is, and since this is the CitiBike Hack Night, and we're all interested scrapers, if you find a novel way to start scraping the crime map that came out just a week or so ago, if we can provide a proof of concept that the data is being integrated into other locations, there's a little government bird on my shoulder that says that may open up a conversation with the NYPD to see if we can get that data unlocked, at least from a more programmatic standpoint. Sadly, that's as far as we can get, so I'm going to figure out how to put that on at least on our January 15th night as one of our big events. So the needs for 2014 is that we're looking for hack nights and weekend events. Obviously, we're looking for sponsors because Code for America only takes us so far. And over the next year, we're really going to be depending upon the community to take care of us a little bit more. And then leadership to help us organize the 2 weekend events that we've set forth. One of them is being Code Across NYC on the 22nd and the 23rd. And the second one would be City Camp NYC and part of the International Day of Civic Hacking in June. So with that, those are kind of our BetaNYC announcements. Does anybody have something that they want to talk about? If they're hiring, if they've got a data set that they're looking to explore, if they've got an interesting challenge, speak up. We're all also, if you haven't been here before, at the end of all the different presentations, we're going to kind of break off into groups and work on some of these problems. So if you got an interesting announcement that you want to make right now, please feel free. Nope. Okay, great. So we're going to go on to presentation time. First up is going to be Jesse Chan-Norris. And as I give a little bit of an introduction to Jesse Chan-Norris, well, he founded Gotham Ruby Conference, correct?
Yes.
He's an awesome...
There's a whole team of us.
There's a whole team of those people. He's also an excellent photographer. He loves making animated GIFs, which are great.
Also true.
Okay, great. He's really intelligent.
And good looking.
And good looking. But I don't know, I'm blind. So the best part about Jesse is that we ran into each other and he said, hey, I'm doing some consulting for CitiBike. And so this is all of the 8 nights that we've had beforehand. This is kind of an opportunity to engage with Jesse and to hear from Jesse of how our nights have impacted his work and also to hear a little bit about the developments within CitiBike.
Great. Is this the mic that I just said?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's, first of all, hello, I'm Jesse. Thanks for the introduction. I'm probably not going to be talking too much about ways in which this work has impacted my work, primarily because I've only been able to attend one of the hack nights in the past and haven't really gotten too much of an insight into what this group has been doing. And another update is that while I was doing some consulting work for CitiBike, originally I'm now running technology for Alta Bicycle Share, which is the parent company of CitiBike, and we also run the bike share programs around the rest of the world, so Boston, DC, Bay Area, Chicago, Chattanooga, Columbus, and Melbourne, Australia. So most of what I'm doing here tonight is I want to chat with people here. I want to see. I'm excited to see. I think there's at least one project that's being demoed and other demos that might come about. And I also just want to introduce myself, say hi. I know that I personally am very interested in the data that is coming out of the bike systems, and I also know that we are, as most companies are, we are resource constrained internally to do all the really cool stuff that could possibly be done with the data. So part of what I want to be focusing on, especially as I ramp up in this role, is to make it easier for you guys to get data or get access to the data that we have right now. So on that front, we're working closely with the city in terms of releasing more of the data itself, coming up with sort of an official data use policy around the JSON feeds, which I know we've had a lot of questions about, and so we're hoping to finalize that stuff, and actually have answers about that in the future. So that's basically all I really wanted to say. I'm excited to sort of see what's going on, and I'm happy to talk with everyone else during the meet and greet and breakout part of the evening. So that's basically it, unless anyone has any questions. But
Can you maybe describe a little bit more about what you've been doing with them, like what kinds of projects and the nature of your involvement?
yeah, I mean, I started out doing a lot of internal work, building internal tools for them, mostly insight into mostly operational insights into what we do at CitiBike. So not a lot of really interesting sort of public-facing data stuff, mostly just making sure that we can sort of run the business properly, and the new role is really just overseeing the technology group that we have, interfacing with our vendor that provides, or our vendors that provide the bike share systems and things like that.
So you said you work for Alta, and they do Hubway as well, right?
Yes.
So one question I've had, because I dig around a lot of these endpoints, is why are they all so different? Like,
what do you mean?
Well, the Hubway endpoint is
an XML feed.
It's XML feed, and it has a different set of data associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
The CitiBike one isn't. The London one, Lord knows. Usually I go through the CitiBike.es, who aggregates everything into a single weird format, but sometimes I have to go directly against it. And then the secondary question is, like, Hubway has extra data points that are being presented or provided, such that... You mean
like the sort of the monthly downloads and things like that?
Yeah. So what's the likelihood that we'll see that out of CitiBike?
That is something that we're actually, a lot of it has to do with making sure that the data that we're releasing is accurate. And so we're working closely with the DOT to make sure that we can actually do that properly. It's a matter of just getting all the data together and releasing it.
Is the way that you operate with the various cities such that you can't take the work that's been done by MassDOT and then backfeed it into DOT here?
It's not so much that we can use it as far as the technology piece of it. As long as the systems are, we operate a couple of, so Alta is an operator, so we operate a couple of different types of technologies underlying it, which might account for the difference that you're seeing in terms of the XML or the JSON feeds from the different systems. Some of the work that we're doing and my team is interested in doing is sort of standardizing those things so that it's the same across different systems. Again, these are just thoughts that we've been having across, sort of around the office. In terms of the technology work, we can use that, assuming that's not something that was built proprietary for a particular city, but we could use that technology. A lot of it has to do with the policies and the data use policies and things like that. And so a lot of that is just working with our clients to make sure that we're all on the same page.
As a just a CitiBike user,
Yeah.
why was it for such the longest time that we couldn't log into the website and see our trips because it was like broken, that functionality?
That was a bug. And that has been fixed. So you should be able to see those trips now. Yeah, and that's a lot of what I've been doing as well, is making sure that that everyone has a good experience, not just from a hacking perspective, but also just from a use perspective. So anyway,
What's the best way that we can help you out?
I think keep building cool stuff that I can then show both the other cities, our cities, the sort of management teams internally, and it's interesting. Right now we do our own rebalancing and things like that internally. We have our own mechanisms for doing that. I suspect if there were really cool, say, rebalancing tools, I know we're going to see one tonight, as I see those things, I'll be sharing them with our team, and it's entirely possible that we could end up using some of them. I know that a lot of one of our employees was hired because he had built a tool. He lives down in DC, and he'd built a tool to help himself out on his daily commute. And then we saw, or it was my predecessor, but saw his work and said, hey, that could be really useful for us internally for tracking, for doing sort of maintenance work and whatnot. And then they ended up hiring him. So I think that a lot of the tools that the community could envision being useful could probably actually end up being useful. A lot of it's just we don't have time to build it. But yeah, so I'm excited to see what's going on and to chat with people. So thanks.
Thanks, Jesse.
Yep.
So next up, we have a special guest, Stephen Clift, who's all the way in from Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I was about to say St. Paul.
Well, it's across the river. So I bring greetings from Open Twin Cities, the brigade in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Happened to be in town and happened to, with Noel's okay, crash a party briefly, and he said as long as it's about bikes. So E-Democracies is a nonprofit based in Minnesota. We do online neighbors forums, and so I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and mix in bikes. So we have a website called beneighbors.org. It's sort of the Got Milk campaign for neighbor connecting online in the Twin Cities. And maybe a quick poll here. How many of you are on a Facebook group or a Yahoo group or a Google group about your neighborhood or your building by chance? A handful. How many of you use Nextdoor? Have you heard of that site? Okay, not so many. Well, anyway, the whole idea is that how can we create places online where neighbors can talk to neighbors? And so we're in an effort to basically create St. Paul as one of the most wired neighborhood connecting cities. We're on our way toward 10,000 participants, about 10% of the households. But uniquely, we're working to connect people across race, income, native-born, immigrant, renter, homeowner, new resident, and longtime resident in these inclusive online spaces. And in my neighborhood, Minneapolis, actually we're up to 30% of households talking every day, from who can recommend a good plumber to discussions about crime. And I have some bike examples to finish off here. So we have those, when you have 30% of households and there are people talking to each other, they're talking about things in their neighborhood, and we talk about bikes a lot. Obviously, we talk about bikers who have lost their lives on our streets. We talk about, we often hear from older residents complaining about bicyclists not following the stop signs and the like, and we have some pretty active dialogues among people as things are changing. Minneapolis is now, depends upon the year, the #1 bike city in America. So Portland and Minneapolis go back and forth. Got a lot of bike trails, a lot of bike lanes. People talk a lot about dangerous intersections, so they actually have conversations. Sometimes the elected officials tune in as well, and we talk about signage or other options. This flyer here, Tim Kemp, he's an Eagle Scout, right? And he posted to about 4 of our different neighborhood forums that he was doing a bike drive. He also passed out flyers as well. But he credits the forums in large part for bringing him 150 bicycles in one day that were donated then to Cycles for Change, which is a program where low-income youth are able to basically fix and build their own bike and take it home. And so that was pretty exciting use of an online tool to bring in bikes. There's also a project called Spokes, which also uses our network to promote their various bicycle programs, particularly with the East African community where we've done a lot of work with Somalis and others. So I have one last story. This is my favorite bike-related story from our forums. This is from a woman named, get it the right way so I can read it, from Hattie Paul. Neighbors, good news to report. Some of you will remember that I posted a reward this summer for the return of my stolen bike, which was brazenly stolen from me while at the Nokomis Library. To make matters worse, the thief rode my bike right by me while I was at Carboni's on the patio. It's a pizza place. And again at Lake Hiawatha Playground. Both times I tried to chase him, but I was with my small child, so it was in vain. But not tonight. While passing by Lake Hiawatha Beach, I spied my stolen bike leaning against the outhouse Biffy. He was inside it. And I immediately grabbed my son's bike lock and locked up my bike. When the thief finally emerged from the toilet, he heard me talking to the police on my phone, I think. He ran straight up the hill on foot and out of the park. He was last seen headed west on 45th. How do you like that? That's a pretty exciting bike story. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thanks. And Stephen is actually a really good person to talk about insights for local community organizing and also bridging diversity. And I know that he had started some of the initial dialogue about organizing inside of a building. So for those of you who live in big buildings or who live in kind of plots that you want to do some local organizing around, like get bike racks in front, don't remove the bike share rack, but talk to Stephen. He's got a lot of interesting insights. So thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Next up, we have kind of these really two interesting bike hacks presentations. For those of you who don't know, a lot of the data that we've been dealing with has been from one single endpoint. Jesse referred to it as the JSON endpoint, and Nick was kind of talking about the diversity of those different endpoints. And so we really, and there's been some other interesting hacks like download your feed or your graph, see how many miles you've been riding. But understand that really there's only one public endpoint. And so John, who's going to be coming up, is going to be talking about mycitibike.com, which is a really cool way to be looking at bicycles. So John, do you want to, or at least the CitiBike? But I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll just leave it like this, or at least his bicycle belt.
Thank you. So as Noel was just saying, one of the issues now is that only that single endpoint, and a lot of the apps out there, in New York at least, only show you the bike and rack availability at the current moment. But if it's rush hour and you're going from, let's say, sorry, and you're going from, like outside of the center of the city into the main part, or like into Midtown, things may change a lot in that half hour or that 45 minutes that it takes you to ride. So what we did is, and my partner on this was a woman named Vivian Zhang, who you may know about, and we use a log of 81 days of CitiBike data, and basically we pull the API every 5 minutes. And then we use that to then say, to basically predict what the availability will be in the future. So I'll just show you quickly how it works, and then we can talk through the different data that it's showing you. So from here, I'll just say, let's go to Williamsburg.
And this is choose a destination, right?
Exactly. So it knows where you are because it geolocates on the browser, and so any browser that has a HTML5 will have your geolocation in the browser. So like here it just said, please say yes if you want to use my location. So that's how we get your location on the for the origin, and then for the destination, you just put your address in there. It takes it a second. So I'll just start here with the origin first. Basically, there's...
sorry, can those of you in the back see clean enough? You want me to lower this down a little bit? That'd be great.
So what you have here is that you have a list of the 5 nearest bikes, the 5 nearest stations, and then how far those are away from your location. And then the first column of bike data on the origin is actually from the API. So that's live data that we pull off the API. And then the second two columns, the 15 minutes and the 30 minutes, are based off of our historical data set. So what happens is that when you type in the, when you type in where you want to go, we take that timestamp and we normalize that up like to like the nearest 5 minute point. So let's say it's like 6:03. We put that up to 6:05, and then we look back on that same day, 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and then up 15 minutes, up half an hour, and then average all of those. And so currently it's just an average of 12 days. But as we get more data, that average could be as many days as we have for that station at that time. So does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions on how that works? And right now we're just doing 15 minutes and half an hour because basically most, if you're a yearly member, you have only 45 minutes. If you're using it just on a day pass, you only have a half an hour. So what you're really interested in is those sort of small time increments. And then we do the same thing on the destination side, except not, like here we're not talking about bikes, we're talking about rack space. Because obviously if you have the bike, you don't really care about bikes at your destination. All you care about is that you have a place where you can put it. And it's basically the same functionality. So it's, how far, like what are the 5 nearest stations, how far are they away from your destination, and then the current rack space, and then 15 minutes, and then a half an hour. And then in the maps here too is also the same data. So, and this is just like in a, just starting out. So we haven't kind of, figured out the styling totally, but that's really how it works. And so, is there any questions?
I have, yeah. So right now you're basically pulling based on day and time.
Exactly.
Do you have any plans to actually look at patterns such as weather or overcastness, or if there was an event, for instance, the 4th of July?
Right. So the way it's structured now is that we have, like for each rack, we have like 18,000 records, and we're just going into each record and doing an average. But ideally what we would do is that take that data, and whether it's 3 months or like a year worth of data, and then for each day of the week, and for our purposes at like 5 minute, every 5 minutes we would come up with a prediction based on a more sophisticated algorithm about like how many bikes or rack spaces were available. So that would require us to totally restructure the way it's built, but that's our next step.
You started talking about this. How far back do you guys go data-wise, and what are your next steps kind of overall for it?
Sure. So right now, this is all based on a 3-month chunk of data that's from basically the end of the summer through the end of October. And actually it's 81 days, so not even a full 8 months. So right now it's taking this time, going back into that set, and then querying the same day, but 1 day back, 2 days back, all the way to 12. So the next step would be to start pulling from the server the API, and then probably build it in a different way, like I was just saying, where we would have every 5 minutes have a prediction of bike and rack availability, and then it would be a much smaller data set then. That was actually being used by the application, but that would be built on a much larger set that we would have, but not because right now it's going through all those different files, and that's why it kind of takes a while. But that's sort of the next step.
Have you had a chance to look at your predictions and see how accurate they are?
Yeah, I mean, one of the basic ways that we do it is like, well, this is what it is now, and are these things like kind of near that? Like, is 15 minutes kind of near that? Is half an hour kind of near that? And for the most part, it's okay. But yeah, I mean, that would be a great next step is to go out and actually see, you know, like at whatever, you know, it said there'd be 15 bikes. Like, are there 15 bikes in 15 minutes or not? But I think before we go to that level, we need to really fix the model of how we do the prediction.
It's definitely interesting to think about a lot of different ways of using this data. I'm curious, have you had much feedback from users yet as far as like the problems that this might solve for them? I would think that, for example, you know, for me, all I care about is if there is a bike, and it doesn't, you know, the fact that there's 15 or 17 really doesn't make a difference.
Right.
Similarly with like a bike space, and also the predictive stuff really seems fraud, especially as like the system itself is very dynamic as far as they're adding bikes all the time, they're rebalancing them all the time, like
Right.
you know, it just seems really. I would wonder if like people really just want to know where can I get a bike, not how many bikes are there at 5 stations. So.
Right, that's a good point. Like, this is all maybe just too much information, right? The point is, will I have a bike where I am, and will I have a place to put it where I want to go? That's a much simpler interface. But you know, for now, it's just like a proof of concept about like, using it. But I think that's a really great idea. Like, the less information that we can give, but the more important that
that's what I'm asking.
is.
Yeah, feedback. I'm not sure. Like.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And like, the next step would kind of basically like do away with these tables and then just have like, you know, something in the map where we would show you like, you know, whatever, and how many, you know, whatever, 15 minutes, like half an hour, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Well, no, just on that point, I feel like the level of detail for me really works because if you just say, yes, there's a bike, but it's only one, that's different from there being 20. And so unless your model is extremely sophisticated and so it knows that, you know, maybe there's a concert in Williamsburg that's going to lead to a lot of bikes going away in 30 minutes,
Right.
then if I know that and I say, oh, there's only 5 left, then maybe I should go now. Or if it says there's actually 20, then that does tell me more and it helps make up for kind of a not as
Yeah, so I mean, maybe it's just not a yes/no, but like a semantic thing, which is like there's more than 5, there's more than 10. There's, you know, I mean, so I think your point is that specific number is not what's important. It's kind of like the neighborhood of what that number is, which is what's really valuable. Like, is there? Yeah, but that's a good point too. I mean, it's more than just yes or no. It's like what ballpark am I in? Like, do I need to run there or can I walk? Kind of thing. Sorry.
I would contradict him slightly in that I'm more concerned with knowing that there's a dock because you don't want to be landed with a bike, whereas before you've got a bike, at least you're free to do whatever else you want. The problem I've often encountered is the thing says that there's 3 docks, you go down there and all the 3 docks don't work. Is there any way of people feeding back into you to say, you know, correcting your information so you can take that kind of thing into account?
Yeah, well, so the way that the data set works now is that it's basically only so in the feed you have like total racks, total bikes, and then like bikes like rack space available, and I think that accounts for the ones that are not in service.
Well, it says that there are 3, but you go there and there are none. You know, that can be very frustrating.
Right. It might be. I mean, and I'm sorry. I was up here earlier, probably knows better how that works, but like, yeah, so.
As of now, the way the feed, there were some problems with the feed earlier that weren't taken into consideration. Like, there were some inaccurate data, but we fixed that. So now, you might see like, if you add up, basically the data that you see in the JSON feed will be accurate. So number of bikes will be number of bikes available, number of racks will be number of racks available. They might not add up to the total number of total racks at the station, which means that those X number that are missing are going to be the ones that have like the red lights.
I'm happy to hear.
Yeah.
Is that more and more accurate each day, or is it completely accurate as of now?
I'm not going to say 100% that it's 100% accurate at this point. To my knowledge, it is accurate.
So a red light bike is subtracted from either availability of rack and
Right.
availability.
It will not.
of bike.
It will not count as either. It will count as neither a bike nor a dock.
Cool.
Right, yeah, so this one for bike racks, the variable is like free, so it's like how many, so that's, the free are only the ones that you can put a bike in, not the ones that are actually physically there. So, and that's already in the API. Sorry, was there another question?
I was just curious, so your model and probably CitiBikes also can't account for when a dock is down but doesn't have a red light? For instance, if it won't actually register a lock or take a bike? Because your data is only good as their data, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the good things about like the fact that it's just like a kind of a dumb average, that basically all those things, and the more information that you have fed into it, that'll kind of, that'll kind of wash out. But, I think there's also value in making it a more sophisticated algorithm that accounts for weather and like seasonality patterns and things like that, and like holidays.
So to build off of his comment, do you anticipate adding a feedback mechanism so that people who do use this might actually spot check when they're there and say, hey, there was actually 15 when there was supposed to be 11?
Yeah, that's a great feature, right? It would just be like a dialog box on the thing that would say like, and that's the other big issue is right now it's not styled for mobile, so it'll just look like a big mess on your phone. I mean, you'll be able to use it, but it's all squished up, and the input screen is really small. So yeah, I mean, as we figure out how we want to make that, make the interface look, I think having user feedback is a great idea too.
Cool. Any more questions? If not, we'll get on to Ben. Cool.
All right, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. All right, so next up is another bike hacker. Ben is attempting to answer the question, where should bikes be rebalanced to?
Hey everyone, I'm Ben. I work at Spotify, which is a company that is cool. I'm going to open some tabs now, so bear with me. Okay. So when you are CitiBike and you're trying to do this thing where you rebalance, you're faced with this problem, which is that there are 330 odd stations in the system. A lot of people have sort of said that this problem resembles a traveling salesman problem. So basically, how can you calculate the shortest distance between 330 different points? As it turns out, that I think will take longer than the heat death of the universe to calculate. So that's not really a good approach. So there's a lot of different ways you can get around that. And something that I was thinking about was, what if we tried to represent the CitiBike network as a network graph? So each of the stations would be nodes, and they would be connected to each other based on how far apart they were. And that's what I tried to do. So this app is basically the end product of those of two distinct steps. One is clustering the stations into 4 distinct clusters. And the second part is representing each of those clusters as a network graph and then picking out the most central nodes in the graph. So it turns out that the CitiBike network splits pretty well into different clusters. So this is just a k-means clustering algorithm run over the lats and longs of each CitiBike station. And you can see there's 4 pretty obvious clusters here. You've got Midtown, you've got whatever south of Midtown. I'm not from New York originally, sorry. You've got like the Battery Park area, and then you've got Brooklyn. And it turns out that I didn't have to do anything to get this to look the way it is. So that's really great. So this was sort of the starting point. Then for each of these clusters can then be represented as a network. And when you do that, you end up with a graph that looks something like this. And I'm going to pop this image out too. So this I think is pretty cool. If and when you represent the stations or those station clusters as networks, you spaced with the edges here being the distances between them. you actually see patterns emerging, and you can see that there's this cluster of stations that are very central to this network. And that's really cool, because what that means is, if you can sort of systematically identify these centrally located stations, you can use that as a proxy for saying, this is the station we should go to first. And there's some really cool things that you get along with that. In order to get these distances, you have to get these edges, you have to calculate the distance, like the great circle distance between the two stations. And we know that it's New York and people are willing to walk. So using the very scientific Yelp walk radius, which I think is half a mile, I said, okay, if a station is within half a mile of another station, you'd be willing to walk to that station. And using that, basically, that's the magic, and that creates this. So this is the finalized version. It looks good because it uses Mapbox. I know someone from Esri sometimes comes to these.
He's sitting right there.
Okay, I like Esri a lot. I use it a lot in college, but Mapbox is so beautiful. So that's why it looks good, because I didn't design it. But basically, you get all this great stuff, and so this page was loaded about half an hour ago, maybe 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, refresh it.
So I'm going to refresh it, and you see the way it works. But basically, the way it looks now is, you've got some obvious clustering of empty stations as people are taking them out, and then they're starting to go back to places at home. So I'm going to refresh the page, send some nice Ajax. Cool, and there you go. So now the clusters have moved. You see that people in the financial district who work later are starting to take bikes out from there, and they're going up to places where people live on the west side, down into here in Brooklyn, and you can sort of see where people are going. And that's pretty much it. The code is all on GitHub. You're welcome to look at it and critique it and make pull requests. Any questions? Sure.
So this is showing empty and full. How do the networks play into this visualization?
Yeah, so I think they're kind of apparent just from looking at it. So for example, this is part of a cluster, but basically the way it works is if we go back to this graph. This is a graph of data from a while ago, but this is all the stations in the network that are 20% full or less. And so this is just the k-means clustering colored based on that. And so what ends up happening is from these stations, from each of these different colored clusters, you pull a network, and then from that network you pull the top 5 most centrally located stations. And that gives you the markers on the map.
So you're only showing the important stations because
Exactly.
they show
Yeah.
what the other ones around them are like.
Yeah, exactly. So similarly, this is not at all optimized for mobile. So it, maybe it should be, but the idea here is that if you pull this up, you should know immediately, okay, we really need to get some bikes down into this area because over into this area because people are, leaving and sort of leaving it behind. What's up?
So this is not for people trying to find bikes? Is it for rebalancing?
Yes.
Because empty, if I go to Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy there, it means there's no bikes? The red area means...
So there's one bike here,
Oh, just one.
bikes here. Yeah, so it's not directly for the end user, no.
Right.
This would be for CitiBike in theory. Mostly it was just fun to work on. But I think that, if rebalancing is an incredibly difficult problem, and if it can be solved or approximated well, end users benefit tremendously. I think it's probably the largest identifiable problem with bike share on a sort of network level. Yeah.
This is pretty cool. So first of all, you pretty much approach it. You do this as a hobby, like for yourself?
Yeah.
For that, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so if I understand this correctly, you basically calculated the most important stations once, and then left all that stuff behind. That doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. There's no back end.
So what I wanted to ask you about is in terms of was there any sort of sanity checking? It's one thing to look at geographic distribution. It's another to incorporate some knowledge there's a really important landmark like the Empire State Building, and whether or not there's something in geographic proximity you might need to have that station.
Yeah.
Prioritized. There's no waiting.
Yeah. No, not at all. So yeah, a few things. There's sort of 2 next steps to this. And the most important one would be to build some sort of model, or more probably steal somebody else's very good model to approximate future bike distribution and base the markers on not what the stations look like now, but instead on what they'll look like in 30 minutes. That would be, I think, much more interesting. And the other thing is that I think, having looked at this a lot, as it turns out, those things kind of wash themselves out during the day, because the big problem, right, is that people sort of commute in from the outside and then out. And so people who are going to the Empire State Building tend to not be doing that at 7 p.m. or 5 a.m. or whenever. 7 a.m. when people are starting to commute in. So it turns out that the biggest mover of city bikes are people who seem to have daily commutes. This is based only on looking at this, not on some sort of large-scale analysis of the data. Although actually there's a really cool video from, I think, on the New Yorker of what a month of usage looks like, and basically it just shows this in and out pattern. So no, in answer to your question, I'm not doing anything more sophisticated.
I had visited Paris when the League first launched, and they found that people would ride them downhill, but nobody would take them uphill, for example. So I don't know if the graph captures, different kinds of distributions like that. But
no, it doesn't.
Anyway, I know it's a very hard problem. I wonder, right this second, there's no way for people to register a miss, right? Like that they tried to get something and it was empty.
No, like I said, there's no back end. When you do everything and don't pay for it, there's
no, not on your end. On the CitiBike end, there's like you can't.
But that would be
they tried to get a bike at a station and it was empty.
Yeah,
I mean,
that would be really cool. I think the other thing that would make this, or make it easier to do something cool like this, would be not to know where bikes are at any given time. I think that's not necessarily, that's got some weird implications. But being able to associate an entry with an exit, so figuring out like where people are actually taking trips, I think is really cool in some anonymized fashion. Because then you can do all sorts of cool things, like use distance, and somebody was in here calculating average bike speed a few months ago, which was really cool. And so, doing those things together, I think you can get all sorts of really interesting things that would sit on top of this and make it better. I think there was another question, maybe not, maybe I answered it. Yeah?
In the course of you having looked at this over time, are there any stations that you noticed are consistently empty and that should be, is there only any one in particular?
It totally depends on the time of day, but the most obvious and recurring pattern is around bridges. So it turns out people like to take trips across bridges, and so if you look in the morning, like all of these will be empty, and then if you look later on, all of these, so you'll see here, like right around the base of a bridge, are all empty. So people kind of do this back and forth pattern. That's, I think, the most obvious thing.
Transit bikes are also going to be big.
Yeah, the other thing that would be cool is to try and associate this with MTA data. But I don't know if any of have you ever tried to use MTA data? It's lacking would be an understatement.
You can get turnstile data. So.
Well, you can get text files that are okay. You can get turnstile data. I shouldn't undersell the MTA.
And the MTA has a very active developers email list, so there's more than likely somebody who has sanitized it for your consumption.
There's somebody I work with did. It says it's in the node registry if you use node. Anyone else? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the clusters?
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand how you described everything
cool.
as a network, and does that mean that those clusters feed into each other?
No. So K-means clustering is an unsupervised machine learning algorithm, and that makes it sound really complicated, and the math behind it is fairly complicated, but in actuality, it's not all that complex. Basically, the idea is, let's say you have a scatter plot, right, of x, y. What you do is you pick random points out of that scatter plot, and then you figure out the average distance between that point and any of the other points, and then you take that point and you move it. And you move it towards somewhere closer to the center. And you do that sort of over and over and over again. So I think this does 10,000 iterations. Then eventually you end up with these points that just don't move at all. And so you're rerunning this program or this algorithm to figure out what is the average distance between this point and any other points in this scatter plot, and the point it just doesn't move because it's already at that center. Then all you do is you take the points and you say, which point are you closest to? Okay, you're closest to this point, you're cluster 1. Okay, you are closest to this point, you're cluster 2. And when you do that, you end up with something that looks like this. This is not a map, this is literally just a scatter plot of longitudes and latitudes. It happens to look like a map because, the thing that is longitudes and latitudes is a map of New York, right? But basically all that k-means clustering is let's say we pick a point here and a point here and a point here and a point here, and then you figure out how far away they are from each other. Those points are going to slowly migrate towards the centers of these clusters, and you end up with something that looks pretty nice. I think on Wikipedia there's a nice animation of it, and it will make a lot more sense when you see it than me trying to describe it. But it's a very common application, or I guess unsupervised algorithm that people use for lots of different things. So this is sort of step 1. Step 2 is then
intermediary question. So does each bike station belong to one cluster exclusively?
Yes. Okay. And what cluster that bike belongs to is not determined until the time the algorithm runs, because the input is stations that are 20% full or less, and that changes all the time. So, the layout of these, this is old, right? So this is like a snapshot of, at the time that I ran this, this is what the clusters look like.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so that's stage 1. And then stage 2 is you feed each of these clusters individually and represent them as a network. And if I can talk to you more about that if you're interested afterwards.
Sure. Cool.
I feel like I've eaten up too much time. Any other questions? Yeah, feel free to grab me afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, man. So now comes the fun part of the evening where you get to talk again. But you get to talk to each other. So as I said at the very beginning, we're trying to change the context so that way, we understand, we as in like Chris and I, who's the co-captain, and kind of the experience and kind of the what we've explored is that a majority of the hacking is done in the evening, at your free time. It's not done here. But what's important now when you have this opportunity to socialize, to talk about these different projects, come up with new ones and post them to that meetup list and saying, hey, I'm going to be working on this, or I've been thinking about this. And if you could do that tonight, that'd be helpful for us to have a snapshot of the different projects that you're thinking about contributing, that you're thinking about building, and if you're definitely working on something that you want to be feeding into this dialogue, as we've done this every single month, I definitely want to engage with you and find out about that. We're going to, as I said, we actually have a transportation hack night. We're going to try to change this more to be transit oriented, just because there's a really unique opportunity with the MTA and the New York City schools. And so the next, what would have normally been our bike hack night, is actually going to be a transit hack night. And it's going to be on January 22nd. And that's really going to focus on how do kids get to school safely under a certain threshold of time. So the New York City schools put out an API. There's this phone book. How many of you went to New York City public schools, high school? Okay, so for those of you who are not from New York City, there is a phone book that's literally the size of a phone book, which is what parents and students have to kind of to decide what public high school they're going to go to. And of course, like any other data set, it's got some master attributes and it's got a bunch of facility attributes. And it had never been really digitized. So they've turned that into an API through Pedia Cities. They gave that out to a bunch of different companies. There was a whole competition that went on. Now they want to find out, now New York City Schools wants to challenge itself, and give kids the opportunity. So you want to go to school. What are the schools that are going to be within 20 minutes of you from here? And so let's take into consideration all the multimodal infrastructure that you have here in New York City: ferry, buses, cars, trains. What did I miss out? Bikes. Oh, thanks. So if you want to start thinking about that now as kind of like a preemptive challenge, thinking about bike share, MTA data, this is a great opportunity. But yeah, so feed back into the discussion that you're going to have now into the meetup page, so that way we can make these events more useful. That being said, any questions for me?
Well, this is sort of a question for you and for Jesse. I was just wondering, the CitiBike plan to expand into lower income neighborhoods? Because right now, basically, the CitiBike map is pretty much all affluent neighborhoods. And as somebody who's from New York, I'm not represented on that map. Many of the people I grew up with aren't represented on that map. And we really, we have to take the subway in order to use the CitiBike. Are there any plans to really expand the system?
I don't know the future expansion plans at this point. We're pretty new to this role, so I think it's something that's important. But as of now, I don't know the actual expansion plans.
Are there any expansion plans?
There should be. I think a lot of it has to do with what the support of the system will be with the next administration, things like that as well.
Cool. Any other yes?
Hi. I think it's a good time to add. I'm Martha Garvey. I'm actually I'm from New Jersey, and I know Noel. And we're in the process actually of Code for America, Jersey City is starting up, and very shortly New York and Hoboken. And one of the things that we actually want to focus on, I was just mentioning this to Jesse, is there's apparently an RFP going out to do bike sharing across 3 cities. So this is just a general, it's Jersey City, Weehawken, and Hoboken in the middle, which, if you guys know, New Jersey's actually a pretty wide chunk of time. It also goes to your question, because those are 3 very diverse cities. So my general ask, and I'll just be on the meetup, is I'd like any kind of contribution towards, we would like to actually get in there early while the RFP's going on, and insist on some data standards. I am not a data scientist, so I'm sure that there's a collective body of information here and wisdom. So you'll see me on the meetup, but that's actually, going again to your question of who gets the bikes, that's also a big part of it too. I'd like to hear about that, because we would really like to sort of not have to retrofit our stuff into, oh look, we have bikes, it'd be very nice to see that we could structure it from the beginning with some degree of balance. So, thank you.
Cool, and just the last any note on that, if you go to the BetaNYC on GitHub, github.com/BetaNYC, there's a project wiki that we've been gathering all these different ideas that has data desires that people have been putting together. There's already a win that comes out from this where the city of Philadelphia put out an RFP for their bike share, and they cut and pasted kind of like our context of data desires, which are also known as kind of like data best practices. And they've also started to outline and cherry pick from the tools and the apps that they want to see produced from the apps that you are already producing. So if you have apps that you want to get socialized, and so that way people can have a greater visibility, come here, because this is where other cities are going to find out kind of like best practices around data as well as applications. So, and the last thing is there is currently a bike share law that Brad Landers put together. It's to get trip data. It's intro. I can talk to you a little bit later about it, but there's a law that more or less gets Hubway data, what the Hubway is currently producing, which is quarterly trips, disaggregated by, I think, but you do get the age of the individual. So you get to see all the different trips that are going on. And the Hubway actually did a visualization competition on some of that static data, which was really, really cool. And I know that there's a lot of transit advocates that are also looking for this for transportation alternatives. So with that, house rules is please clean up after yourself. There's roughly 45 minutes. At 9 o'clock, I kind of want to get out of here. and go home and cuddle up on my couch and watch some TV. So thanks for coming out. Please discuss and consume as much beer as possible.